In libertarian debates, I often see attempts to justify the non-aggression principle. One of the weakest and most confused is the appeal to natural law. Let me be clear, I'm an anarchist. I support the framework of voluntary interaction. Market anarchism, anarcho-capitalism, anarcho-anti-communism, whatever label you prefer, the NAP-based legal system is the only one compatible with a civilized society. It protects bodily autonomy, consent, and the pursuit of values. It leads to human flourishing, and that's why it works. But many libertarians reject this pragmatic foundation. They insist the NAP is more than just effective, that it's moral. They claim it's grounded in objective rules, natural rights, human nature, rational law. This is nonsense. There is no such thing as morality. If by morality you mean a stance-independent, truth-apt property that dictates what agents ought to do, regardless of their values. That belief is a fantasy, and libertarians need to bury it. Deontology is a lie. There is only consequentialism. Why? Because of the egoist axiom. Agents act on their strongest perceived value at the time. This is self-reinforcing. Denying it requires action. And action is the pursuit of value. To deny egoism is to prove it. And from this, consequentialism necessarily follows. You cannot act against your own perceived value. You cannot aim at what you don't want. The moment you act, you reveal the end you value most. And that is consequentialism. Action for the sake of outcomes. So when someone says we must follow the NAP because it's moral, they're confused. You follow the NAP because you value peace, consent, trade, and autonomy. It's the outcome that drives the action, not some invisible cosmic rule. And now I'll show you why not just morality, but the entire system of moral cognitivism, the claim that moral statements can be true or false, is incoherent. Cognitivism collapses under itself. Its central claim is nonsense. It says that moral statements are truth-apt, and that they can be objectively true or false, just like factual claims. But this is absurd. Truth isn't what you declare. Truth is what is. Truth is the actual condition of reality, not your emotional outburst about it. If a statement is truth-apt, it must correspond to something real, a concrete state of affairs. So let me ask you something. What does it mean to say that murder is wrong? What's the actual condition of the act? A person died, someone acted, and the event occurred. That's it. That's the truth. That's the reality. Now the moralist says that's wrong. But what does the word wrong even refer to? If they mean that wrong, as in factually the case, if they mean that wrong was factually incorrect, that is insane. The murder happened, the action occurred, there is no factual error. So they must mean wrong in a moral sense. But now they're equivocating using wrong as if it has the same epistemic weight as false, when really it means I don't like that. What they really mean to say is that murder is evil. And then this is when we enter the fog. What does it mean to be evil? Where is evil? What's its physical condition? What's its referent? And this is the problem. There is none. These are empty labels. They're personal preferences and social rituals made to sound objective. Here's the contradiction at the core of cognitivism. They claim that moral statements are truth-apt, meaning true or false. But those statements refer to nothing real, so they use true and false arbitrarily. Or worse, they claim all moral rules are always true, which would make immorality impossible. Either way, the theory implodes. They don't know what they mean by moral. They don't know what makes a statement true. They can't define the state of wrongness. They can't point to a single moral property in the world, because there's nothing to point to. And that is why moral truth isn't just false, it's meaningless. And in the final segment, to make natural law meaningful, you'd have to do the impossible. First of all, you'd have to refute the egoist axiom. Second, you would have to deny our nature as consequentialists, that we act for outcomes, not obligations. And then you have to justify cognitivism by explaining what moral means, what makes morality true, what is the actual state of wrongness, And where do moral properties exist in reality? Or the far easier position is that natural law is just consequentialist. If man acts to pursue outcomes he values, and you call that pursuit good, you've abandoned rule-based morality. You're chasing consequences. And that is consequentialism. Now, let's deal with the myth directly, natural law theory. It claims that morality is objective, it's rooted in reality, especially in human nature. Man has a purpose, and fulfilling it is morally good. Reason can uncover universal moral rules. I think that this is bullshit. The problem doesn't vanish. You still can't produce a prescriptive truth from any of it. This is the infamous is-ought gap, the naturalistic fallacy. The core issue. The nature of something doesn't tell you what you ought to do with it. You don't get to pick which natural traits are morally relevant. That would be arbitrary. And arbitrariness destroys objectivity, which natural law claims to uphold. And yet, natural law insists we can extract moral duties from nature or from reason. Here's the truth. You can't bridge the is to the ought because it's logically impossible. Why? This is the rule of containment. In logic, a valid argument cannot introduce a new term or modality in the conclusion that wasn't in the premises. That includes ought. If your premises are descriptive, like man is rational, or rational acts lead to flourishing, your conclusion must remain descriptive. You cannot logically say, therefore, man ought to be rational. That is invalid, and you've injected a normative claim from nowhere. This isn't my opinion. It's formal logic. Validity demands containment. Break that, and you break your argument. And that's why that's why natural law fails. It all assumes purpose, value, goodness. Then they try to declare that those assumptions are facts without proving any of them. They never bridge the is to the ought. And this is why natural law is dead.
So that was a lot. Oh my God, the camera.
Yeah,
Discord
that was
hates
a lot.
fucking OBS sometimes. But Jesus Christ, what is happening? It's perfectly fine. My virtual camera is perfectly fine on OBS, but
It's working for me, bro.
Discord is not liking it. All right, there we go. Well, it was just lagging. So this is a really, really, really good write-up as to why I don't think argumentation ethics bridges the is-ought gap. I don't think this is a very good write-up as to why natural law is dead, per se, or why natural law doesn't exist. Because I think, so let's start from here. What do you think ethics is? Like, what would be your definition of ethics?
So ethics, broadly speaking, I believe is like the study of what man ought do, or something like that.
Right. So do you believe that ethics is just nonsense?
No,
That like there is no such thing as ethics?
No, because consequentialism and deontology fall under ethics. So I think that the fundamental point of the ethical branch is to kind of figure out how we ought to act, basically.
Right. So if we start from there, right, that ethics is valid in that man has goals, that man has values, that man's values are interdependent of others, but also dependent upon others in the sense that man has different skills and different values. And because of that, the pursuit of one's values can be expanded by interactions with other humans, right? Are you following me? And so there's a valid goal of ethics that says, you know, once at least 3 people, right? I don't want to do the 2 people thing where one person kills the other and then the problem is resolved, right? At least 3 people where there's, you know, it's intersubjective communication, that it is a valid pursuit to determine what is right or wrong in an ethical system, right? What I would say is this is what you wrote up is a very good example of what I was talking about earlier. I don't know if you're watching the stream, of why I don't think the the argumentation ethics bridges that is ought gap. I don't think it's possible. What I do think it does is it proves that anyone that is attempting to justify violating the non-aggression principle is no longer doing ethics. That instead they're putting themselves into a performative contradiction, and that they are ascribing to the law of the jungle and calling it ethics. They're saying, well, we ought do this, and that it is purely it is yeah, well, you get where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah. Actually, I want to clear this up for everybody in the audience. I've heard you talk about argumentation ethics for a long time, and I was always like interested in what it meant, and I actually like figured it out over like years of research, because I didn't fully understand when you and Liquid Zulu were talking about argumentation ethics exactly what it was. For all the audience members out there, what argumentation ethics is, and I'm going to put it really bluntly and really simply, and you might even disagree with this, but I think
it's going to piss me off, but that's okay.
It's going to piss you off. Argumentation ethics is literally just saying to somebody, you are not aggressing right now. You are not aggressing right now. You are not aggressing right now. That's literally just what it is. Now, when we talk about performative contradiction and rationalizing and not engaging in aggression, argumentation ethics is simply that when you are having a conversation, it means you are not aggressing at that moment. However, and this is the problem, it doesn't mean that you won't aggress later. So people can collaborate. For example, if you're socialist, if you're Russia in 1950 or 1940, you can be at a board meeting and not be aggressing, but that doesn't mean that you're not planning out aggression, right? And they did with socialism.
Well, that would be non-argumentation, though, right?
Well, they would be, no, because that would be argumentation and ethics in the moment, because in the moment they're not aggressing.
No, it wouldn't.
Yeah, because they're not aggressing.
Well,
in the
no,
moment.
if you're right, but if you are currently planning and deceiving someone because you in the future desire to win this argument or to win control over them towards another aggressive means, right? That's not argumentation. So you can't have an element of fraud.
Yeah. If you're deceiving, yes. So it's baked into argumentation ethics that you have to be arguing in good
the future. Let's say in the future, upon a whim, they decide to dominate you.
Or if they change their mind later,
right? If later at another day they go, oh, this is too difficult. Actually, I've changed my mind. I want to fucking bomb you all, right? Like then in the previous conversation, they were engaged in true argumentation, and then they gave that up. So I would say that it's obviously more than that, because if I gave that explanation, no one would believe me, and I'd have to prove it, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what I would say is that the performative contradiction comes in because when you are choosing argumentation, no fraud, none of these other things, you are recognizing that I have bodily autonomy, right?
Right.
And so by recognition of this bodily autonomy, you are establishing a moral norm. You are establishing, insofar as we are discussing ethics, right? You are establishing that via your actions of engaging honestly and attempting to convince the person of whatever argument it is that you're having in that moment, whether it's, blue cheese is better than ranch, it doesn't matter, right? In that moment, if you're engaged in genuine argumentation, you are recognizing that this person is their own body, their own person with their own autonomy over their body. And the reason you're recognizing that autonomy over their body is that you recognize that they're making the decisions about whether or not they agree with you. And so the concept of bridging the is-ought gap, I agree with your assessment in a lot of ways. I mean, I think it's a bit wordy and it has a bunch of things in it that I don't necessarily agree with, but I agree with the overall theme, which is that, saying, oh, I've grounded the non-aggression principle as just logically true, is I don't take that leap. Liquid Zulu does, and I disagree with him on this. What I would say instead is there are two rules that you can play by. You can either claim to be doing ethics or you're not doing ethics. And if you're doing ethics, this whole system is proving that in order to claim to do ethics, you have to affirm the non-aggression principle.
Okay, well, let's
If
unpack that.
if you're not affirming the non-aggression principle, then you're not doing ethics. And if that is the case, then you have granted permission for all sorts of violence, and you ought be received. I would say ought, not within the system of argumentation. I just mean this communicating, outside of that, like to you, that people ought recognize that as a potential threat.
All right, well, let's unpack that real quick, because you said engaging in ethics. You can't really not engage in ethics, because ethics, I think you might sort of be baking into the idea that morality is like within ethics, which it is, but ethics is composed of three main branches itself, which would be the meta-ethical side, the normative side, and the applied ethics side.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
the first way to go about it, which is the argument I'm
Hold
kind
on
of
one second.
on.
Chat. This is not a group panel, all right? Stop saying let me in, let me in, let me in, all right? He didn't agree to come in and have 20 people from chat tell him he's wrong, right? He agreed to a conversation with me.
That's crazy. I mean, I'd be interested in, I don't want to talk to them, but I'd be interested in their whatever, their rebuttals or whatever. I don't think they have it. But anyway, back to my point. My main attacking trajectory is cognitivism.
Mm-hmm.
This is the main one that I'm hung up on, because broadly speaking, all of ethics is either goes down one of two rabbit holes: cognitivism or non-cognitivism. Cognitivism is just the idea that morality is factual, right? It's truth apt, and then non-cognitivism believes that morality is just an attitude. It's just our emotions. Basically, what we think is morality is really just an attitude of behaviors. And so, to me, first of all, the egoist axiom, which I think you agree with me on, kind of like completely eliminates the fact that we can go down a rule-based path. Like, it just completely disconnects us from going down that path, because we can only do that which we value. And if we can only do that which we value, it's concerning the outcomes, not the rule itself. So
hold on. This is just to interrupt for a moment. I think maybe it's better understood through this. What my claim is not. My claim is one can play one of two games. They can either play the game based upon their own personal preferences, right? They can play the game of ethics. They can play the game of society ought be structured this way. People ought live under these rules. This is what is right and this is what is wrong. Or they can play the law of the jungle and play just power, and that there is no other game to play in that domain. That everything is either in the domain of the non-aggression principle affirming, and that, or it is in the domain of pure law of the jungle. And that when I say something is factually true, I am not making the statement that it is factually true that one ought follow the non-aggression principle. What I am stating is it is factually true that if one wants to create a system of ethics of how human beings in a society ought engage with each other and call it, and judge it via right and wrong, they must follow the non-aggression principle. That is what is true.
Okay. I actually think I understand what you're saying. Let me ask you a question. I think this will clear it up really well. I've always wanted to ask this question to Christians. I call it the hell test. Okay. So basically, you have two options. Either you can do the right thing and go to hell, or do the wrong thing and go to heaven. Which would you choose?
I would say, from I'm not a Christian, right? So obviously this would slip up the Christian, but as an atheist and as a I guess you could say anarcho-objectivist, right?
True.
I would say that it cannot be true that it would be the wrong thing to do an action that would put you in hell. But then again, heaven and hell aren't real. You know what I mean? So it's like, I guess I would need I guess I would need like a concrete example.
Well, no,
but like without the action
it's
itself listed, right? Without the action itself listed, I would be choosing my own pain and suffering and then calling that the right thing. And if it's say, let's say it's, murder a child, right? If we add that as opposed to just the wrong thing, right thing, I can choose whether or not to murder a child. If I murder a child, I go to heaven. If I don't murder a child, I go to hell. I would then be saying that this is like both of these actions are wrong, right? Both of these actions are wrong because they're both anti-life positions. They're both
Yeah.
neither of these positions are life affirming. One because it requires me to kill a child, and the other because it requires to make a decision to place myself in eternal damnation and torment.
Yeah. No, I think that this proves the point of the hypothetical, which is to challenge Christians on what what they say their values are, and what their values actually are. The point of the hypothetical is to prove that everyone is a consequentialist, because you would be a complete idiot. I think anybody who says that they would choose to go to hell for doing the right thing is just a liar. Like, they just wouldn't do that. Everyone would.
Some people would.
So,
some people would.
But yeah, I think they're
people
liars.
do not always. People are certainly rational actors, and that they act in their own rational self-interest. But because people have a higher hierarchy of values, the psychological, especially in the moment, not fully understanding the consequences, right? Getting into the consequentialism again. They would choose what they deem to be honorable or they deem to be righteous, and accept suffering and feel positively good about that. That would be their preferred outcome, because they would prefer to die with honor and dignity than to prefer to die in quote unquote sin. So some people would, for sure.
Yeah, that is true. There's a handful of people who would do that, and I would say that it's not the smart thing to do. But anyway, I think what you're doing, and I don't think we disagree, what I think you're doing is you are changing the definition of morality to fit something which makes the individual flourish. Basically, what is it that makes us flourish as humans? And this gets rid of degeneracy. This gets rid of legal atrocities. That's what I think the objectivist and the natural law theorist does. They're changing the definitions of morality to fit the prescription that we ought to do that which makes us flourish. Is that right?
I mean, I won't deny that it is likely that objectivists and, Ayn Rand and libertarians may have worked backwards from a preferred outcome, but that doesn't mean that the logic isn't sound or that it's untrue. Even if it is true that, they have a desired outcome of a functioning functioning society, right? That has their preferred outcome, and then they worked backwards to see if that is true. I don't think that that's actually an argument against whether or not the logic is true or not. And it may very well be true. It wouldn't surprise me if it was. You know what I mean? Because most people, you start with your desires. You start with what it is that you want to see in the world. You start analyzing the things that you think are wrong in the world, and then you try and figure it out, right? So, like, it would almost be impossible for someone not to work backwards in that way, unless they were like super fucking autistic or something, right?
Well, the greatest philosophers. Anyway, so, but like, this does come back to the question of, I am interested in getting your answers on these questions. The questions I laid out in my opening, which is egoism, the case against cognitivism, and then the case against natural law theory. So I think you would affirm my first position, which is that everyone is egoist and you can't escape your egoism. Do you disagree with that? Or
okay, so hold on. Let me find the full context of it. Is that under refuting? Is that under moral truth is gibberish?
Refuting natural law is the first part, and that's going to be egoism. Moral truth is gibberish is going to be the cognitivism part, and then the last part is natural law.
Let's find the full statement, right? So I can, before I just affirm anything. Like what specifically do you or am I to be affirming here?
All right, if you can find the one line, this is nonsense, I can start reading it. There is no such thing as morality, if by morality you mean a stance independent truth apt property.
It dictates what agents ought to do regardless of their values.
Yep. That belief is a fantasy, and libertarians need to bury it. Deontology is a lie. So
there is no such thing as morality. I disagree with that. But then you say, if by morality, you mean a stance independent. What do you mean by stance independent?
Okay, so stance independent just means that morality exists separate. If like humanity didn't exist, morality still would exist.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree that morality would be stance independent in the way that I am discussing it, because humans could die off, but
But morality would still exist.
Assuming if there was some other species that was able to attain consciousness and be moral actors, right?
No. So what I mean by what stance independent means is that it exists.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what you mean by it.
Not necessarily what it exists. It exists independently of all minds. So like any creature, any alien, any, as you would call, moral actors.
I would say that
it would exist.
It would still be true. Yeah. It would still be true. I'm only giving the example of moral actors coming to fruition because that is the only time that it would apply, right? So the truth would still be true, at least the arguments that I've laid out, not necessarily the arguments that every libertarian has laid out, but the ones that I've laid out, which is, if you are going to attempt ethics, then one must affirm the non-aggression principle, because ethics is requiring a conflict avoidant system of law in that regard. So that is what I mean by
well, that's not law. True. You could just be a consequentialist and want to avoid conflict, like me.
But that's not right. But I mean, like, I'm not saying, hold on. I'm saying that if you're doing ethics, then you are attempting to create a set of rules or laws or standards, however you want to do it broadly, right, of how we ought act. And that if you are affirming conflict in your system, that you're falling into contradiction.
Okay, interesting. So how you would define ethics is how I would define legal system.
I mean, insofar as we're talking about natural law, yes. I mean, we can branch away from that, right? But we're discussing natural law and the non-aggression principle.
Yeah, but
right?
you said that to you, ethics is just the idea of trying to set up how we ought to act. So I think that you logically cannot find a way that logically purports what humans ought to do, but we all presuppose that we want to flourish, and because we have that ought, then we can make an ought statement, which is, since we want to flourish,
I don't know if there is a one standard for every action or anything. I don't pretend to know. I lean towards objectivism. I lean towards the idea that there is a true moral action out of every scenario. But I don't know whether or not that's necessarily true. I might just be too much of a pithy philosopher for that, and to have appropriate grounding. And B, I certainly am unconvinced that we'll ever discover it. But setting those aside, fuck, I lost my train of thought.
We were talking about brothers kissing sisters.
Brothers kissing sisters, right? Yeah, I mean, like, well, I would think that would be context dependent, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm not a deontologist in the sense that I think that, like, if there's coercion, right, then your survival is more important than like the potential problems of kissing your brother. You know what I mean? Like so it would be context dependent.
It's Andrew Wilson's favorite argument. It's his most favorite argument.
I was just saying, like, if I have a gun to my head, right, that changes the scenario.
Yeah,
obviously.
It's just funny because the Christian ethicists, the ortho bros, right, they have a big problem with degeneracy, such as incest and homosexuality.
I do as well, right? I just don't approach it deontologically, right? Like, let's say we had 100 humans left. Okay. Now you have two options. You can either not engage in incest and let the human race die, or you can engage in some level of incest and let the human race flourish again. And if God commands you to be fruitful and multiply, well, then you need to accept incest. Like, incest under certain conditions would be following God's commandments. So what the fuck are you talking about? Right? So you already recognize that
true.
The moral action is context dependent upon other factors. And so, like, this idea of, like, this specific thing is wrong because God said so, breaks apart once you start looking at it from, you could say, an egoist position or an objectivist position, whichever position, is affirming the concept that man ought do, what it is that he values to bring about his desires out into the world.
Yeah, no, that's true. But
you know what I mean? Like obviously
yeah.
incest is okay in that scenario. 100 humans are left, all other humans are extinct. You can either let the human race die, or you can fuck your first cousin, because that's going to happen at a certain point. Not in the first generation, but the second generation is going to have to engage in some level of incest in order to propagate the human species. It'd be impossible not to.
Well, that is very biblical. But anyway, so just to get back to I guess like the main argument, or cognitivism, or whatever.
Okay, so stance independent. So
right.
Truth apt property that dictates that agents ought to do regardless of their values. So I wouldn't, I would disagree with, see, regardless of their values, like I would absolutely agree with that. Agree with, there is no such thing as morality if morality is to be defined the way that you put it. And the biggest one that pops out to me, especially, is regardless of their values, right? Because that would be the cornerstone of what is moral to me, right? Would be
values.
Well, right, like what is good, as far as I can define good, is what is, what is it that man does to shape his environment towards his own survival and towards his own values and towards his own will, right? To subject someone to go against their will and to go against their values. Obviously, the non-aggression principle here being a caveat, would be an issue with me.
Okay.
Right, like for example, like the height of evil would be like the demand of sacrifice to the greater good. That would be the height of evil to me, because it would go directly against man's values and man's own independent will, and would be as well a violation of the non-aggression principle, if they forced that sacrifice.
Yeah, but you're speaking in consequentialist terms, right? You're talking about results right now. You're not talking about the good.
I mean, objectivism is a fairly consequentialist philosophy.
Well, you've got a problem
here. It is just
a
consequentialist philosophy that eventually gains to the point, at least as far as some Randroids are concerned. I don't know. I'm not the high-minded philosopher of Liquid Zulu or others, right?
No, bro,
I am but a neophyte.
Listen, I can tell you right now,
I am but a neophyte.
Objectivism is they really don't even know what they're talking about. Like, and I wish I could be more humble about this, but I have thoroughly talked to and looked into objectivism, and as smart as Ayn Rand was, like, she was really, really smart. They claim to have created like this moral system that is completely non-flawed, that is completely grounded in morality. But like, if you just look at the debates,
I want to address chat real quick. You said objectivism is teleological, not consequential or deontological. I agree that the foundation of objectivism is considered by objectivists to be teleological, but in practice, right, when we are talking about how does one determine what they ought to do, it's consequential. Like, it just is, right? Yeah. Like, it's absolutely consequentialist when they say, should I put ketchup on my French fries or should I not put ketchup on my French fries, right? And then you go off of, well, what's going to be better for me in the long term and in the short term? And what's going to be better for me is, I'm personally allergic to onions and garlic, right? So I'm not going to put ketchup on my French fries because most ketchup has onion powder in it or something. And so it'd be bad for me. It would be bad for my survival, be bad for my general well-being into the future. So that's like in practice, it's consequential. Like, you can say that the philosophy is grounded in moral truths, but the practice itself is consequential, if that makes sense. Like, so I wouldn't put, I would say objectivism kind of sits in an in-between state, because its founding is based off of moral truths it claims to have discovered, but its practice is consequential.
Yeah, I would disagree with you. I would say that rational self-interest and the whole idea of objectivism is, they think that they're grounded in morality, but all they're in fact doing is they are accepting that they are egoists, which is the first step and the most important step, but then they're not following through with the idea that they are consequentialists. Because if you are an egoist, you are a consequentialist by corollary. Like, you must be, because
why do you make that claim?
Because the ends
curious.
justify the means, and the ends are the most important thing for the egoist, because the most important thing for the egoist is their value, their rational self-interest, their highest flourishing. Right. At all costs, they must achieve their highest rational self-interest, their highest flourishing. And it just so happens that the way to achieve your highest self-interest, your highest flourishing, is by living a good life, following the law, creating a family, etc., etc. That's the pathway. So the methodology is the same as like the Christian route.
So, okay, but the issue that I have with that is it universalizable?
No, but people want things to be universalizable, but they can't have that.
So if it's not universalizable, then it's not a moral claim, correct? You're saying that there is no morality.
Yeah.
Okay, so your argument is like an error theorist, kind of, right? Like your claim is that morality doesn't exist. It's just like a pretend thing we made up because it sounds nice to call things good or evil.
Yeah, emotivism. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like I can work within that framework. I just want to understand where you're coming from. So, if that is the claim, then are you? It seems like you're in a deadlock because the moment that you make a claim that someone ought, you can't make ought claims.
Well, yes, you can.
Because to make ought claims is to affirm that there is an ought, which is to affirm that there is something that people should do that is better than the other, right? Like how do you make an ought claim if you're denying morality? I'm curious how you circle that.
Presuppositions. So everybody has presuppositions. As egoists, we all presuppose that we have value. Now, here's the key distinction. We don't know that we ought to follow our value, but we just do. It's kind of like logic. And dude, I've been talking with ortho bros. They're crazy, especially the presuppers. It's the same thing with logic. Yeah. You don't ground logic. You use logic. It's the same thing as you yourself. You don't ground the things that you ought to do. You just do the things that you want to do. Now, you can live a good life or you can live a bad life. The good life.
You can't define good or bad though. If you don't believe in morality, then you can't live a good life or a bad life. You just
I'm using the terms heuristically. I'm using the terms
right. But this is a problem, right? It's like, how do you communicate ideas when you deny all morality, and morality can't be universalizable? How do you claim anything is good? How do you claim anyone should do anything?
You just change
every
the terminology.
Claim of should is just like a nonsense claim.
Yeah. So you define things, and you're right. Good and bad are vacuous terms, and they're not good. Better terms would be intelligent, stupid, healthy, unhealthy. These are terms that we should be using for consequentialism. So an action that is healthy would be one that achieves your rational self-interest or your flourishing. That would be something that is intelligent or healthy.
But why ought you do something healthy?
Literally just because you value it. That's why.
Okay, so you would never claim one ought try and be healthy.
You can tell them that they ought be healthy if they value themselves, or if they value their flourishing. But you can't tell them that they ought to do that from a neutral point.
Okay. So why would someone value being healthy or not being healthy?
That's a good question. It's something we can't answer. It's something nobody can answer. That's like a cosmic question.
So you're saying if they value being healthy, then they ought be healthy.
If they value being healthy, you can't
make an ought claim.
If they value being healthy, they ought be a capitalist. They ought be an anarcho anti-communist.
I'm trying to. How can you give an ought claim if you don't believe in ought claims? Like
you don't.
I'm not trying to be a dick here. I might just be dumb.
No, you're right.
But I feel like you're sneaking in something.
No, you're right. You're exactly right. You just said it. You just said it.
What did I just say? Right.
You said that you
don't. Is that what you're saying?
You can only get an ought from an ought. People must want their own lives to be good in order for them to seek things that, and when I say good, I just mean healthy. I just mean healthy, flourishing. That's what I mean. So they have to want that first.
So if they value something,
if they value themselves.
Okay, yeah. But the objectivists would say that those values are, grounded in, species survival, and their will to map their environment towards whatever their values are, and then can make. I don't understand why you think that the objectivist is incapable of making the ought claim. You seem
Because
see you're saying there's this egoism that you've accepted that
Mhm.
then defeats it, but I'm not seeing it. And again, I might be dumb, but it's I'm not seeing your defeat of all morality, and thus ought claims ought not be uttered, which in and of itself is yeah a claim, right? Like I
So
don't see how you
yeah.
converse in language whilst denying the existence of morality or odd claims.
So well, first of all, the
Will you
defeater is just
stop spamming let me in chat? This is
crazy.
not a fucking this is not a
So
fucking
crazy.
panel.
I know I'm pissing them off because this is capitalist on capitalist blood feud, capitalist on capitalist violence. But no. So the quick defeater is just the Izot gap. And to expand on the objectivist view fails because they say life is the standard of value, which is true, but they also can't tell you why you ought to value. They can't tell you why you ought to have a good life. This is just something that you can't derive deductively. You can't derive deductively or inductively why you ought to have a good life, because ultimately it comes down to the choice of the person themselves if they want to flourish or not. And this is a cosmic mystery. I don't deny that at all. Like it's absolutely the mystery of like why humans exist, what is our nature, what ought we do. Like these are questions that we want answers to, and sometimes it's like we're scraping, the very outskirts of like logic to try and figure these things out. But like some of these things just don't have answers.
First, I got a super chat. So, what's your take on left libertarianism? I don't know if it's to me or to you. I'll tell you from my perspective.
Square triangle.
Um, I listen. I like libertarianism, but I have recently adopted and committed to anarcho-objectivism for a reason. And the reason is that because libertarianism is prescriptive descriptive in terms of natural law philosophy, which is what we're talking about, right? It opens us up to a whole domain of things that are not a violation of the non-aggression principle, but that we still are going to have, we're still going to have to create ethical systems and voluntarily work against or towards. So, for example, prostitution, right? Prostitution is not a violation of the non-aggression principle, but I can look at prostitution and state and show that it's not psychologically healthy for the John. It's not psychologically healthy for the prostitute. It's not conducive to a healthy society, both from a disease standpoint or from gender relations standpoint, and a whole host of other reasons, right? And I can say, well, that's bad. It's generally bad for people. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad for literally everyone, right? If I could prove that it was, aggressive or bad for every single person in existence, then I might be able to justify some level of, violence to stop it. And so because there is all of these things in that domain where you need a prescriptive philosophy in order to deal with those questions, you have different forms of libertarianism, left libertarianism being one of them. And I am adamantly opposed to most left-wing philosophy, both in its social mores, but also in some of the axioms that it will sneak in that I think are anti-libertarian, right? I'm against queer theory. I'm against gender abolition. It's like, well, where did queer theory come from? Well, queer theory is coming from critical theory, which is a new way of cleaning up, Marxism. Well, it's like, obviously, as a libertarian, I'm not going to affirm some philosophy that is derived from Marxism that carries in, that often carries in the baggage of other axioms that would eventually subvert and attempt to destroy libertarianism. Now, left libertarianism done correctly, right? That affirms libertarianism first and foremost, always. Yeah, I don't want to fucking live there, but if they want to go live in Vermont or something and have their own left libertarian commune, then be at it. Okay, so if you want to answer, you can as well, but I
Yeah,
think it was probably
libertarian
me.
socialists are square circles.
Yeah. So, um, you say why ought the question is that you're saying the objectivist cannot say why we ought value life.
Yeah, exactly.
But how does one act without while not valuing their own life?
Because there's
Like isn't the action of
that's a good
acting
question. Yes.
valuing their own life? Isn't that kind of like
Correct.
proving it?
Exactly. Because this is one thing that we don't understand. There are presuppositions baked into human biology, and we don't know why they're there. Like, this is like another really, really deep question, maybe even like a religious question of like, and I don't mean that in like God and Christianity, but like it's very deep. Like, why does humanity attempt to have a life that is good, like a life that they flourish? Why do they want to reproduce? Blah blah blah. Some people might say evolution. I disagree. Um, but like people, this is one of those deep questions, which is like, why do we act? We don't know why we do act, but a human acting is different from deriving oughts from logic. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
but that's not really okay. But the thing is that you're saying is that you cannot affirm life as an ultimate value, and yet you can't
Right.
not do so by acting. You're proving your preference for living, unless your action is to kill yourself, which
Mm-hmm.
then takes you out of the equation as a moral actor because you're dead.
Yes, everything you said is correct.
Okay, so why is that like why is that a cosmic I'm not understanding. Like it seems like we're adding complexity to the thing that maybe I'm missing something,
Yeah,
but it
no, I
seems like you're
mean,
adding complexity where there ought
honestly,
not be any.
you can just forget what I said. I was talking about something that I've kind of thought about for a while, but there's some like baked in presuppositions into like human biology of like why we act, and these are mysteries that we don't understand. It's not super relevant to the question. It is like an interesting topic, but it's
Mhm.
not like super relevant if you don't want to get into it. But it's kind of like a
Right,
whole
because like
separate rabbit hole.
the objectivists would say that life is a foundation of all values that you have
Yes,
because you're like it you said like as you said it's a precondition or a
presupposition.
presupposition or whatever
Yeah.
um for the values in and of itself, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can't have values without valuing your life. And then so if you choose to live, you act and engage in ways to further that life, and to further your values are grounded upon that ultimate value of life,
Yeah.
right? To eat, right? It, you could make the claim I eat to avoid discomfort, right? I eat so I don't starve because it's painful, but you're also affirming your life like by eating, and when you eat good food, and I mean this good as in, you go to a Michelin star chef, right, as opposed to eating at McDonald's, right? You're affirming a value of, delicious food and, well-made food and food that makes you extra happy, but all of that is going to be grounded in an ultimate value of life. So I'm and then how do we survive? How do we make choices as conscious moral actors? Is that we have reason. Other animals don't per se have reason. Inanimate objects don't have reason, right? Like a rock doesn't make choices, it just is, right? A lion makes choices, but it does so devoid of complex reason. It does so
Mm-hmm.
because, much like the human, it wants to live, so it engages in behavior that allows it to live. But as human consciousness gets more complex, we are able to choose between ordered values and use reason and logic as a means to gain higher values, or gain things in the long term. And so yeah, so I'm having a hard time seeing how this, like where is the chink in the armor here that I'm missing, right? That proves that morality doesn't exist, at least from the objectivist framework.
Okay, so the first thing is that rationality and logic, these
Hmm.
are methodologies. They are not in ends in themselves. They are means. They are the means to the ends. Now the ends is the key question here. We don't know. Some people like the natural law theorists and the objectivists believe that we
Hmm.
can learn the ends using logic. But this is actually not true, because I mean, if somebody could have found it out, they would have created a syllogism by now of like how it works. But like, And
Well,
as
just
I
because
said
something
before,
isn't discovered doesn't mean it can't be discovered in the future.
well,
But again,
so
I have my doubts about it as well.
yeah, so well, because this is the is ought gap. It's logically impossible to get from an is to an ought because of the rule of containment and the axiom of derivation, which we don't have to fucking talk about those pieces of shit. But like the whole idea is that it's just an invalid logical structure in order for you to have two descriptive statements in your premises and then get an ought statement in your conclusion. It's just it's impossible logically speaking. So there's no way to get from an is to an ought, and this is one of the grand mysteries of life. But I know it's super confusing, but I'm not denying that life is the standard of value. I'm not denying that man acts on his value, and I'm not denying that it's not in his best interest to achieve his value. If you want to call morality that which you are achieving your greatest value, that's fine. But when people are talking about morality and objectivist and natural theorist perspectives, they're talking about we have universality. We can tell somebody that they ought to act in their greatest self-interest, and there just is no grounding in this.
Hold on. If your ultimate value is life, which we both affirm, right? You're okay with that.
Yeah.
And reason is the means by which we determine our values and make choices to gain those, to fulfill those values, right? um then if someone is, how are we not able to say that drinking poison, for example, how am I incapable of saying you ought not drink poison? Because whatever it is that you are valuing is, if it's grounded in life and survival, then that is an ought not. You ought, though the values themselves are affirming the life of the ultimate value of life, and so something that is anti-life is against reason and is against that ultimate value and
Well, it's
is
not
against
against
those very
reason.
values that you're claiming.
It's not against reason because reason is a methodology. It's not an end.
That's fair. That's, well, I would say however you got there would be an improper use of reason if you
Yeah.
got to the decision to drink poison, right? Because every action that you're doing is that life affirming action. So so by that I can say one ought not speed down the highway going 100 miles an hour because they're taking an elevated risk. They're making a decision that is more likely to kill them than to gain any level of happiness. Now, again, it is going to be context dependent, and this is the problem of, like, I understand when you say, well, how do we universalize that? Because I could say it's a universalizable claim, one ought not go 100 miles an hour down the highway. But if let's say you and I are hanging out in Richmond City late at night and someone shoots you in the gut, well, all of a sudden the life affirming thing would be to drive 100 miles an hour down the highway to get you to the nearest hospital as quickly as possible, because I'm willing to take in that small risk of a car accident for the greater risk that you're going to bleed out and die. But I don't think it being context dependent doesn't mean that those claims can't be universalizable. It's just that the context would change the scenario.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right.
But the important thing here is in your first premise, and the first thing you said is if we value life. I agree with you, but that's an ought to an ought. That's not an is to an ought. So if a person doesn't value life, they ought not act in their self-interest.
Well, we can still make a right, like I would say, well, yes, yeah. Like someone could be suicidal, they don't value life, right? And in that regard, if we're basing it off of their claims, then I guess they ought to kill themselves. Um, but again, my whole claim has always been an ought to an ought claim, right? My claim has always been, if one wants to construct a society that is functional, that allows man to achieve his values, then he ought not violate the non-aggression principle, and that if he attempts to say that we can create a system of ethics that we ought live under that is conflict inducing, that this becomes the non-true statement, or this becomes the contradictory, or I guess potentially contrary statement, because both could be false, but you get what I mean, right? Like they both can't be true. And so that has always been my claim. I don't claim to
That's
bridge the is ought
perfect.
gap, and I don't have like an issue with I don't necessarily have an issue with not knowing that. When I say that the non-aggression principle is grounded logically speaking, it is incumbent upon two things. A, one values life, and B, one values a system of ethics. If
Then
one
yeah,
if
then
one
I would agree with
eschews
you.
either of those, then it's invalid.
I agree with you, but the thing is, those two, what I'm just gonna say presuppositions because that's the word I could think of. Those two presuppositions,
Axioms.
those axioms are both consequential. So you're a consequentialist.
I would never call myself a
I know
consequentialist,
because it
even if it
sounds
was
dirty.
technically true.
I
Just
know.
Well, no, just because it's like it's an association with a philosophy that overwhelmingly doesn't actually support what I believe, right? Like
That's not true
the
though.
grounding may be
You believe in the
right, but it's
results.
like what's like
You believe in
okay,
the results of
let's say every
flourishing.
right, but what I'm saying is like let's say every anarcho-capitalist and every libertarian dies tomorrow, except for me. Would I continue to call what it is that I believe anarchism? It's like it would technically be anarchism, but every single person's understanding of anarchism would be like a utopic, non-hierarchical idea. Like I would choose a new word for what it is that I believe. Right? So like it's like so I wouldn't if you are making the claim, I don't know that it's necessarily true that this makes me a consequentialist. Um which I would have to look into more because I don't I don't know that I'm willing to do so. Even if that were true, I probably still wouldn't call myself consequentialist because what consequentialists affirm by and large doesn't agree with my philosophy or my worldview. You know what I mean?
I do understand what you mean. And like, yeah, utilitarians do
Right?
kind
Like
of
I don't want to
like,
be associated with like fucking social
I
progressives
know.
that say it's okay to tax
Well,
people,
because all
you know,
leftists are utilitarians, you know?
50% of their money so that we could right. It's like, but that's what everyone thinks when they hear that term. And so it's just like it would just be dumb to call yourself that, even
But
if it
that's the
was a
problem.
technically
Like,
true thing.
they
So I don't
have
know that
muddied
I
the
necessarily
waters.
agree with you that I'm consequentialist.
I agree with you. Like, the fucking leftists and progressives and liberals have all muddied the waters and they've kind of desecrated the idea of like, just the name, just like they desecrate the name of literally everything they get a hold of. They desecrated the rainbow. They desecrated, I don't know, Protestant churches or whatever, and then like they've desecrated everything they've touched. Liberalism, like the idea of classical liberalism, they've desecrated that too. So they desecrate everything they touch, and I agree with you. But
Yeah.
just because they've destroyed the I don't know, the title or like whatever, the statue, whatever the title, it doesn't mean that they're correct in their philosophy. And their philosophy is
Yeah. I
they
mean,
want to flourish, but they're using big daddy government to make their lives worse.
yeah. I mean, I think that objectivism has some claims about, like I have no problem. Hear me out. I have no problem if it is true. I don't like again. I've taken a couple of philosophy classes in college, and as anyone that's been to college in the last 20 years knows, you don't learn anything in fucking college.
True.
Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I studied how to map, if then and ands and shit in my logic course, and then forgot all of that shit and had to relearn it
Propositional logic. It goes crazy.
et cetera. But
Yeah.
so if it is technically true that I am that objectivism is a subcategory of consequentialism when done under the means of which I put forward, right? Which is that if one values life and if one wants to do ethics, than all of these things, it would still be a subcategory with its own name. And so like the only utility in calling it like I don't see very much utility in calling it or affirming consequentialism in that regard. Like maybe we agree on that. Maybe we don't. again, like I'm not that much of a philosophy bro. I am more so than 99% of fucking online debaters that throw out a bunch of terms that they don't understand. But nevertheless, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I'm not a great
Fucking
philosopher.
Phil bros.
Um,
Yeah, no, okay, so
I don't even.
okay,
Go
so
ahead.
if for you it's just the name, totally okay with that. Totally cool. All I care about is that you have the real ground, like the real philosophical grounding that nobody can ever knock you over. Because, and this is like my biggest problem with seeing, I know me, a fucking nobody, but the biggest problem with me seeing libertarians talk about like NAP as if it's a given, like, and you know this because you saw the Dave Smith debate against Andrew Wilson. You saw this. This was the most
Mhm.
catastrophic mess up for a libertarian ever. And it's because he didn't have the proper grounding. Dave Smith is a great debater. He really is. He sucks at meta ethics, though. Like that's just how it is. He sucks at meta ethics. Libertarians need to
Right.
have the proper groundings that nobody can ever knock them over. And when they plant their feet in something
Well,
like moral realism, they can get knocked over.
I think he can. I think I agree to a certain extent because he didn't have answers for tough questions. But I also think that you can get into like this recursive problem where you're like constantly going, but what about this? But what about this? But what about this? And you eventually get to like unanswerable mysteries of the universe, right? So like in terms of like, am I a consequentialist in the way that I put it forward as an objectivist? Like I don't know because I see what you're saying, like, and I kind of agree with that perspective that in one way, and yet if I also see the perspective of like, well, it's not just the consequences that matter, right? It is also like if something isn't life affirming, then it is outside of morality and therefore is wrong. And therefore one cannot, one cannot help but be, in the state of life affirmation. That if someone is in like not affirming life, right? They want to commit suicide or they want to murder or something that it is a wrong action, at least as far as the moral framework of consequential, of objectivism is concerned. And so, like, I don't know. I'm not like again. I'm not a super big philosopher. I try and learn and understand philosophy to have a better understanding. Going into debates and stuff. But I disagree with your assertion that like everything must be a bedrock, unshakable. I think for most encounters, for the overwhelming majority of encounters where we're talking about debate and rhetoric, it's you need to be grounded well, but that doesn't mean that you need to know everything. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
Dave
I
Smith
think I
was
can agree with that.
wholly unprepared for that debate, right? But it wouldn't have taken a fucking a perfect philosophy devoid of any gaps in their armor to be able to defeat Andrew Wilson in that debate. It would have just taken someone that read some libertarianism and remembered, like remembered what, like you could literally just read everything Hoppe ever wrote and then just take it as true, and you would have been able to decimate all of those arguments.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Destroy, because
And I
since
guess
decimate
to be
means take away
fair,
10%, but you know what I mean.
yeah, no, I know what you mean. I guess to be fair, like when I say ultimate grounding, I guess this really is only appealing to like 0.001% of like everybody watching the video because those are the only people who are actually really going to care about the actual grounding. I don't know. Maybe I'm just kind of projecting because when I can see like a really big, clear, massive flaw in an argument and it totally fucking rubs me the wrong way because I'm like, oh shit, like that's bad. But like maybe other people don't see that and I'm just kind of projecting. So I don't know. Maybe that's
I mean,
a me thing.
there also here the other problem is, it might be bad for you, but the overwhelming majority of normies don't understand any of this shit.
Yeah.
They just take whoever agrees with their values. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm a Christian. I'm against degeneracy. This guy used the big words, and the other guy tripped up because he's nerdy, and he doesn't agree with my values. Therefore, my guy won because he was confident and he was loud and he said the big words that I don't know. And that's going to be the overwhelming majority of the audience.
Wow, that really
So, like in
sounds like a
terms
Jay
of
Dyer
rhetoric,
debate.
yeah, for sure. Like every J Dyer debate or
Yeah,
Jim
that's like
Bob
every Jay
debate.
Dyer debate. Oh my god. I'm doing a video on him. He is such a stupid guy. Dude, he is so dumb. He is so dumb.
No, I wouldn't say that. He's not dumb. You can't do what he does and be dumb.
Okay, then bad
That is
faith.
something that is a big pet peeve of mine, right? Bad faith, yes. Says a lot of bullshit and gish gallops and interrupts and is dependent upon the fact that his audience is not truth seeking, but rather W seeking. All of those things are true. But you can't have the ability to quickly weasel out of arguments and immediately gish gallop and say other things and engage in that level of fierce competitive rhetoric without being above average IQ.
Okay, or talented. Like somebody could be intuitively a talented debater. So I can grant that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but like I'd say you need to at least have a slightly above average IQ to even be talented at that.
All right, fair enough. Okay. But so you're going to keep natural law theory or whatever. No, you're going to keep objectivism because you're an anarcho-objectivist. But you
Well, I
would
mean,
at
I think the
least
two ought. I think the two ought
are
because I can make
it's
those
true.
claims. Ought be.
They're basically the same thing
married.
for you, right?
I think they both have made some errors, and that a proper marriage of the two is necessary for a worldview that is coherent with liberty.
Okay. Yeah, my biggest gripe is just that people understand that whatever cognitivism, it's not real. There's no such thing as a moral property. The only thing that really does exist is values. And it just really rubs me the wrong way when people talk about morality, but they're not speaking about anything. They're using morality,
I mean,
but they're using it vacuously, like the term vacuously.
I mean, I view like this bridge is very similar to me of like the existence exists axiom, right?
No, it doesn't.
And so like an axiom is if this is true, then everything else that follows is true, right? And so I think the same thing is kind of true with life as an ultimate value, right? I think it's every action that you're doing is, that is either one of two things. It's either affirming life, or it's not affirming life. And so if it is true that life is the ultimate value and that we ought follow that ultimate value insofar as we follow any values, then objectivism is true in that regard. And I think that kind of circumnavigates the claim that it's consequentialist, both because it's individualist, right? Consequentialism would there's those kind of classic cases of where an objectivist would reject it and your typical consequentialist wouldn't, of like the thought experiment where like someone's dying and then or someone's sick and you kill them to save 5 other lives, or the trolley car problem, etc. Right? Like the consequentialist, to be a true consequentialist, you would have to say that saving multiple lives is better than the other.
That's actually not true.
And then, but again, yeah, it's like I think
this is where
that's
they
actually
get
just utilitarianism
wrong
and not consequentialism.
Yeah,
right.
This is where they get consequentialism wrong. But sorry, make your point. Go ahead.
I agree. I think it's utilitarianism and not consequentialism. But at the same time, it's almost what everybody like. There's a certain
they're synonymous basically.
Where a word, I just mean there's a certain point where a word is
corrupted,
is conveying something. Well, it's like corrupted is one thing, but even still, like a word is used because it functionally communicates an idea, right? And so the word can be corrupted to such a degree where consequentialism, you can argue, from high on heavens that this 18th and 19th century philosopher appropriately defined consequentialism. But if all of the people around today that are lauded as experts and all of the people that talk about it today say this is what consequentialism is, and then you go, actually, I am, according to this, William Whitaker's, Webster's 1850 dictionary, you're like at a certain point, like you're not conveying what the word means anymore because it's gone out of your control what that word actually communicates.
Yeah, that's funny because you kind of sum me up completely as a person. The way I study philosophy is I literally look up like what like the definitions of things in philosophical terms, and like people are like, you're using that word wrong, and I'm like, actually, like I am technically speaking using the word incorrectly compared to the common knowledge, but the way I look things up and understand them is like, if you look deeply enough into the things, you will find patterns that are just like true. For example, consequentialism and deontology
Yeah.
are the only two, and I know this is controversial. They're the only two normative theories, consequentialism and deontology. People are like, no, they're not. There's 6 or 7 or 8. It's like, if you look deep enough into it, you will realize that there are only consequence based and there are only rule based, and everything else follows into those two categories. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because yes, I do often
Right.
fucking whatever
Well, it's
change the
just like,
definitions of things.
chat was saying, it's you're using it non-colloquially, or
Yeah,
more precisely, linguistic shift, right? Like
it's a fine
the word just
criticism.
no longer means that anymore. And so it's like, if we might even be in agreement, it may just be a difference in
Semantics.
terms.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know, because I don't go out here and say I'm a fucking philosopher, right? I just go out here and say my philosophy is more well grounded than everybody else on this panel.
Which is fine. It
Which
does the
is
trick.
true. Well, no, it's just true,
Yeah.
like I know that I'm not destined to be a great philosopher, you know what I mean? And I'm glad, because every fucking great philosopher has like been holed up in a house with roaches and like survived on a diet of pure nicotine and caffeine, like writing crazy shit at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Poor Nietzsche. But like, here's what I will agree with
Huh?
you. I said poor Nietzsche. But like, here's where I will agree with you. Basically,
Nietzsche
I mean,
or Kant, even though I wouldn't say Kant is a good philosopher, but you get what I mean.
Kant making out with Ayn Rand is crazy. Anyway, so I would agree with you that for the vast majority of people, it doesn't even really matter, because you can just use objectivist theory and be right, because basically everybody who's alive already presupposes that they want the best for themselves, whether they're lying to you or not. Like, basically everybody does that. So if you have an objectivist framework, you
Yeah.
can basically steamroll everyone anyway. So I guess that doesn't really matter.
Well, the thing is that like it's really, really, really simple. You either affirm objectivism or you go kill yourself right now.
Yeah, that's true. Life
Why
is
are
a
we even
standard
having an
value.
argument? Go kill yourself. I mean, obviously, you can't say that on YouTube, and I'm on YouTube. I'm not saying that anyone should kill themselves. If you're fucking struggling, call a suicide hotline, call a
In the
friend,
link
get a
below.
support network. Don't do drugs and alcohol. Okay, talk to a therapist, a real one that does cognitive-based therapy or rational emotive behavioral therapy or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, not a fucking feminist with 22 piercings that calls themselves a fat and neurotypical. But okay, but I'm saying that you can end any conversation about ethics that way, which is like, are we playing the game of ethics or are we not? Okay, well, if we're not, then, whoever has power wins and this entire conversation is meaningless. And then the second one is, do you value life or not? And if you don't, go kill yourself. Okay, well, you prove that you value fucking life. So for all intents and purposes, the very fact that you're having this conversation with me proves that you support a founding value of life, and that and so we can work within that framework, and we can say we're not bridging the is-ought distinction because we're working off of the ought, which is one values life, so they ought value these other things that are affirming of their life or affirming of the flourishment of their own values. And we
Yeah,
ought play the game of ethics, not the game of power.
that's true. That's true.
I,
And
I'm
that
okay saying that I don't bridge the is-ought gap. And if you want to call that consequentialism in like a classical definition, I mean, I guess I'm okay with that. I just don't ever want to be fucking associated with those people, because overwhelmingly it means something that I'm not to everyone
fair
else.
enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I'm still gonna call everybody consequentialist because I'm right, but I totally agree with you. I see your point. Consequentialists, most of them are basically dirtbags and degenerates. So I don't even blame you.
Well, it's like
Um,
it harkens back to an unpublished writing by Rothbard, right, where he was discussing what should we call ourselves when he was coming up with the naming convention of anarcho-capitalist, and he toyed with the idea that maybe we shouldn't call ourselves anarchists, we should call ourselves non-anarchists, because he was very worried that trying to reclaim the term anarchism after it'd been so poisoned by leftism, would be like an uphill, impossible battle, and that calling yourself an anarchist, everyone would just assume that you're against hierarchy and that you hate private property rights and that you hate, individual liberty and all of the things that it isn't, despite the fact that it is within the vein of what Proudhon was discussing, an anarcho-individualism, and then takes in, Austrian economic theory, in discovering certain things, and worked with Ayn Rand, to determine, to create that philosophy that is all of those things. And it's like, I kind of feel him, even though he never published it and he decided to go with ANCAP. I kind of feel him. I'm like, maybe we would have been better off calling ourselves anarchists. Like, cat's already out of the bag, right? But maybe we would have been better off not using a word that already had been poisoned so much.
Yeah, anarcho-capitalist is kind of a mouthful. But to your point, you're right. Technically speaking, anarchists, the real anarchist is actually anarcho-capitalists, because the second definition, right, if you look up the second definition on Google, it literally says against unjust hierarchies, and that's literally what anarcho-capitalists are. They're just against unjust hierarchies. They're for voluntary hierarchies.
Unjust hierarchies was what Proudhon argued for. It's what Belguru argued for in the Anarchist Manifesto, which is where the symbol, the A and the O comes from, is anarchy. Anarchy is order, government is civil war. And that's why it's A within the O, because it stands for anarchy and order. And he affirmed private property rights. He affirmed the right to police. He was a minarchist. He wasn't even like an anarchist in the way that we consider it. And he wrote the Anarchist Manifesto and came up with a symbol that all the leftists are using. It's like, I always just find that funny, because it's like, oh, okay, you haven't even read that shit. Right? It's like, it's in that vein. And then in the anarcho individualism in America, which is, Tucker, Spooner, Voltairine de Cleyre, lesser known name, and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I just and up until Chomsky was the first time that anybody took issue with that, is that he wrote On Anarchy in 1972 that anarchists were against unjustifiable hierarchies. And he even argued that capitalism was an unjustifiable hierarchy. And yet they were like, no, we're against all hierarchies, period.
Which is literally which is just fucking insane. Gobbledygook.
Right. It's like, okay, do you want to learn how to cook? Okay, you decide to learn how to cook from someone. Okay, you've just adopted a voluntary hierarchy. You've recognized that they're an expert in cooking and you're not, and they're going to teach you. What the fuck are you talking about? How do you have like, what?
And speaking of hierarchies,
to reject hierarchy is to reject human values.
Yeah, exactly. And human nature. Like, I want you to hear this analogy that I use, or not even analogy, just like an argumentation method I use, which I find so intriguing that nobody ever considers. But like, the whole idea of hierarchy dynamics is economics is literally one of many hierarchies. And we want to distort the economic hierarchy, the financial hierarchy, so badly, so often. What I want to ask people who want to do that, people who are not capitalists, is I want to ask them, why are you okay with distorting an economic hierarchy, but not an attraction hierarchy, not an athleticism hierarchy, not an intellectual hierarchy?
Height,
literally
racial.
If they were consistent, exactly.
I'm going to end the conversation on why are you not against racial hierarchies?
If they were consistent.